In this video, I'm going to give you $30,000 worth of relationship advice absolutely free. Now, you might be wondering, how is relationship advice worth $30,000? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you exactly how it's worth at least that much to the penny at the end of the video. But for now, know that I've broken this video down into chapters so you could skip through and click through different parts that are most pertinent to you and where you are in your relationship right now. Because if you have a problem and it's really painful, I want you to get right to that part of the advice. But if you have the time, I would prefer if you watch the whole thing, because I think it's going to give you a better sense of how this framework and how this thinking ties together. It's the exact way that I've helped literally over 3,000 relationships. At this point, it's closer to 4 in my 13 years of doing this, and I'd like to give that to you. Without further ado, let's jump into the first mindset and kind of shift in thinking that really makes this so valuable. There are really two categories of skills that you need to perfect your relationship. And the reason I think it's important to talk about the two types is because it's important you understand that they're very different. They're different in terms of the headspace you use. They're different in terms of the approach. They're different in terms of their goals. And it's not like you get one if you just learn the other. And so I've met a lot of people who have natural ability in one of these two areas, but I've never met anyone who was just born with both. And the two areas are conflict and closeness. Now, some people are really great at being romantic, making sure their partners are heard, that they're validated, that they sweep them off their feet, and they express affection in ways that resonate with them. And so they're good at closeness. And there are some people when kind of the rubber meets the road and it gets tough, so to speak, they are good at resolving conflict. They're able to be fair without being aggressive. They're able to let people feel like they really have the best intentions for the relationship in mind. They're able to think outside the box. They're able to have a sense of teamwork as opposed to a me versus you attitude. And they're good negotiators. That's essentially what it is. You're being a good, empathetic negotiator. But I've never met anybody who can do both naturally without education well. And so whenever people come into my practice, they've almost always, universally, they say we have communication problems. And my first question is, well, which one? Is it communicating that you guys aren't getting enough affection and love and, closeness in the relationship? Or is it that you're arguing and you just never seem to get past the arguments? Now, one will lead to the other every time. If you're not good at affection, you bet your bottom dollar that you're going to have conflict issues. I mean, that's just natural. And if you are having conflict issues, 100% it's going to, seep into the sense of closeness and intimacy you have. But you have to approach each as different, right? One is really a positive thing and one's a negative thing. The idea that you need to actively pursue closeness on a regular basis is a mentality you have to adopt if it doesn't come naturally. And one of the biggest problems with any relationship is as it goes on, the longer it goes on, complacency sets in and you just take each other for granted. And so that's the challenge of closeness. Whereas with conflict, it's a negative. You want to avoid conflict. But in order to avoid conflict, you have to have a reasonable way and an educated way of attacking problems as they come up. And don't think that you can learn one and just absorb the other somehow or intuitively get there. There are skills, there are techniques. And the truth is, I'm not going to go into all the techniques of resolving conflict. It'd be a video that's very long in and of its own right. Same thing with closeness, right? But I want you to understand that they're separate ideas and separate tools. There are many books written on conflict in marriage and outside of relationships, right? Sometimes business. And sometimes those negotiation and conflict resolution techniques are really applicable to a romantic relationship. But there's going to be books and books and different approaches of it. I know for me, for example, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I break down conflict into 3 areas, right? It's the before, so bringing up something is going to be a touchy subject. There's the during. If you're having an argument, what are intervention techniques so that you can stop the argument? And then if you miss those 2, there's the after. After the conflict, how do you come back together and resolve it when people are hurt, where there's resentment that's grown? And each one takes a different approach, but they are all under the umbrella of conflict. Now, conversely, closeness is going to be a whole different thing. It's about understanding where the person feels closeness, how they feel it, how often they need it, if it's more of an internal thing or an external thing, if it's very private or if it's done in public. And so really understanding not just your partner, but yourself when it comes to the type of closeness you want is kind of the name of the game. But again, the reason I put this as one of the many things that you need to learn is because they are different, right? Learning how to be close and learning how to resolve conflict are different headspaces. So if you find that you're having problems in your relationship, ask yourself which one is the bigger issue. The next thing I want to impart upon you is specific to conflict. Remember, we just talked about conflict versus closeness. Now, again, there are many strategies for approaching conflict. But one thing you need to remember over everything else is that timing is everything when it comes to conflict. In the previous section, we already talked about the before, during, and after. But each one of those is also kind of, you have to know when to read the room, essentially. So if your partner just came home and they had a really hard day at work and they're sitting on the couch like this and they look like death is overcoming them, that's not the time to bring up that you want them to do dishes more often. It's the wrong time. And so when it comes to conflict, sniffing out when the right time to bring it up is really the first and most important thing, because the way that you start an argument is the way that it will last for the rest of the argument. If you start hot, like you never do the dishes, that is the tone, the argument. There's lots of empirical evidence on this from clinical studies. The way an argument starts within the first minute defines the way it's going to go. And so obviously you need to come in softly. You need to come in with some warmth and compassion. But if your partner is not in the headspace to listen to whatever it is you're trying to solve, and they kind of put up a wall, you're going to get nowhere. And so you really have to be careful that the time you bring up the issue when you're trying to resolve the conflict is an appropriate time. A great example is if you're in public and you want to resolve a conflict and your partner is someone who's easily embarrassed, you absolutely must bring them away from the crowd. They have to have that talk in private. Embarrassment, for people who are sensitive to it, you have to keep this in mind, is like death. It's something that a part of you dies when you get embarrassed, especially by your partner, and it never goes back. It really doesn't. It's like stealing time. You cannot get that time back. And when you embarrass someone, you're really killing off a part of their spirit. And so in a crowd, if they're sensitive to that, you have to pull them away, right? That timing of telling them in front of everybody else is going to kill any chance you have at being productive in that conversation. Another example, other than, someone coming home or speaking in a crowd, is when you're on the fence, right? You look at them and you think, hey, this is a good time to bring up conflict, but I have some doubts, because you're not always sure. The easiest way to tell is just to ask, right? So oftentimes I'll do this even with my own wife. I'll say, hey, there's something important I've been meaning to talk to you about. It involves the kids, or it involves us, or it's about our sex life, or whatever it is. Do you have time to talk about it? Are you open to hearing it now? And just the fact that you're able to request it instead of demand that now we have to talk about the problem, right? That sense of it can wait opens the door, because immediately it's signaling to your partner that you're going to talk about it fairly, with patience, with compassion, with warmth, as opposed to, we need to talk, right? How many of us have gotten that phone call or have gotten that text like, we need to talk when we get home? That sense of we need to, and it's very aggressive and it's off-putting. And if you're the type of person who is kind of conflict averse, we would call that an avoidant attachment style. If you don't like confrontation because that's really uncomfortable for you, the "we need to talk" proclamation is like a sentencing of death. It's just unbelievably painful. And so if you're that type or your partner's that type, you need to learn to ask. And that's usually, even if you're sure it's the right time, it's still polite and it sets the table for how the conversation's going to go. And so that's my biggest recommendation with timing, is to just ask. You just say, "Hey, is now a good time to bring up an issue I'm having with our relationship? It is serious. We are going to need some time. Are you in a rush to go somewhere? Are you dead tired? I don't want to exhaust you. If this isn't the right time, we can wait. We can even schedule it. But it is something important and I would like to talk to you, but I don't want to bombard you. I don't want to overload you. And if now's not the right time because you got in a fight with your mom or you had a hard day at work, I love you enough to wait." I mean, who's going to argue with a person like that? That's so sensitive, right? Try that, and I think you'll find that your conflict resolution attempts, whatever technique you're using, are going to go much smoother. When there's pain in a relationship, and by the way, if you have a relationship without pain, please contact me right away if it's if it's a long one, because I want to know how the heck you did it. Every relationship has pain. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody feels hurt. Everybody has sensitivities. Nobody's born a perfect person and just, is the perfect relationship wizard from the start. There's always going to be moments where you make a mistake or your partner makes a mistake and there's pain. And part of the beauty of being in relationships is learning how to work through that pain and withstand that pain and be resilient. And the lessons you learn from those mistakes really define who you are as a couple. But you have to also accept that when something is done that causes pain and you ask for an apology, forgiveness is not a momentary thing. Forgiveness is a process. Because whatever happens in your relationship or whatever has happened, the number one reason you ask for an apology and people are even willing to give you forgiveness is because they want the relationship to continue. And the apology is kind of like an insurance policy that it won't happen again. And that's why apologies are so tricky to begin with, because if they're not given in a way where the person really believes that you understand the pain, then they don't have that insurance policy that you won't commit the same, crime again. If you, the clearest example is infidelity, right? So if you had an affair, be it emotional or physical, if you've had an affair and the person says, "I'm hurting," and you sit down and you talk to them, and even if you tell them everything that happened and you hear about how it hurt them and you say, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again," the person might kind of give you a little bit of space. They'll give you a little bit of that trust that you once had, but it takes time not to build the trust, but for them to willingly give it to you fully. I don't like the term building trust because the truth is you don't really build it. It's always a gift. I've known people who've been in relationships for 20 years and suddenly someone cheats on them. And in a drastic way they never saw coming. And sometimes it's because they're abuse victims and it's just coming to the forefront now. Sometimes they've just succumbed to a temptation they've been battling their whole life. There's lots of reasons, right? But 20 years to build trust and then you break it. Are you going to take another 20 years to build it back up? That's not how it works. Trust is a gift. I just give it to you. At a certain point, it's a leap of faith. Like, I don't know if I can trust you, but I want to. And so I'm going to. That's really what it comes down to. Now, getting that strength and that courage to jump off that cliff again so that you give your partner strength, that takes courage and that takes time. And so if you're the person who's committed the betrayal of some sort, and it doesn't have to be infidelity, it could be a betrayal that you forgot somebody's birthday, or it could be a sense of betrayal that you aren't as helpful around the house as you said you would be, or that the expectations weren't met, and maybe it isn't even your fault. Maybe the expectations weren't communicated. But if there is a sense of being let down or a sense of betrayal and you're apologizing, First, you have to apologize the right way, and I'll get to that in a second, but know that it's not an overnight process. And so if the person is still hurting over specific issues in your relationship, be patient with them. If they bring it up again, and the worst thing you could do is say, "You're still on this? You still, I mean, are you ever going to forgive me?" That's the wrong attitude. Now, at a certain point, yes, you have to say, like, enough's enough, right? Like, I can't be the villain in this relationship forever. You have to figure out when that is. So I would say, let's use another tangible example. Let's say you did get caught cheating on your spouse and they were furious, rightly so. And you apologized and you expect them to just forget about it and move on right away. I'd say you're dreaming, you're delusional. Then again, if you apologize and then they bring it up, once a week, let's say, because they're still struggling with it, and you're patient and you're patient and you're patient, and that goes on for 3 years, and they still can't forgive you, I would say maybe it's time to say, listen, I've tried to be patient with your healing process, and I know I caused the problem, and I know it's not your fault and it's my fault, but at the same time, I'm not willing to live in a relationship where I'm always the bad guy and you can't get over it. And it's not fair to you either. If you really can't get over this, I think, we deserve it to each other to maybe consider breaking up, or maybe there's another way you can get that closure you're looking for. But clearly it's not me apologizing or doing whatever it is you're doing. And again, tone is huge, right? So you can't say, "Oh, I've apologized this thing 3 years in a row now, every single week. What else do you want?" If you have that tone, it will never go well, right? You have to look somebody in the eye and say, "Listen, I've given you everything that I think I can. If you have new questions we haven't gone over, I'm happy to answer them. But at a certain point, if this is too broken to fix, you either need to find another way to fix it, or we have to end this relationship." Right? So forgiveness is a process. Come up with a timeline you feel is reasonable. If you feel like it's something drastic like an affair, right? And if you can't get over it in that time span, sometimes you just can't get over it. But it is a process. It almost never is overnight. And if you are with a partner who's able to forgive super easily, kiss their feet and be grateful, because that is rare. Routine and structure takes precedence over surprise. I'm going to say that again. In your relationship, routine, structure, consistency is infinitely more important than surprise in your relationship. I had a recent couple, and I'll tell you the story of what happened. Really sweet couple, and they've come really far. Not. I'd like to think it's because of me, but the truth is I always played this tiny little role. People have to do the homework themselves. So even if I'm giving you the best guidance, the fact that you take it upon yourself and put it into place means that you get 99% of the credit, and I'm just one sliver there. But they followed the guides and they really did their homework well. But life got hectic, and what happened is this husband promised, or didn't promise, but he kind of talked a big game. His wife's birthday was coming up. It was a big birthday. And he said, "Oh, let's do this for your birthday, and let's do that for your birthday, and I want to buy you this special gift, and big piece of jewelry, and let's go on vacation and go to dinner and make it like a big celebration." And normally she doesn't celebrate her birthday all that much, but she was excited. She kind of bought into it because he talked up such a big game. And what happened? He didn't follow through. Now, the reasons he didn't follow through really are dealing with his own anxieties. It's not like he did it because he's just a jerk. He wanted to buy her the right gift. He felt like he didn't know what to buy her. At times he's bought her expensive gifts and she's hated them. And his feelings were really hurt. So he was getting anxious. He didn't know where to plan. Every time he asked her, she said something really casual. And he's like, "No, I want it to be more special than that." And so it was just kind of this thing where, yes, technically it was his fault, but it wasn't because he just forgot. He actually was overthinking and it got in the way. And so what did he do? As an example, because I want to bring this back to the whole routine and structure thing, he decided, okay, well, it's not too late. I blew the birthday. Let me plan a nice surprise evening. and he kept trying to sneak into her phone to get the babysitter's phone number so that he can arrange childcare. And he couldn't sneak into the phone. He just couldn't do it. Every time he went to get it, she was there. I mean, she's a stay-at-home mom, and so it's really hard unless it's in the middle of the night, and he kind of needs his sleep, so that wasn't an option either. And I asked him during the session, I said, why was it so important that you like sneakily hired the babysitter? Couldn't you just ask her to hire the babysitter? And he said, I wanted it to be a surprise. I feel like it's not, meaningful if like she has a part in it. I said, well, if that's the case and you want it to be a surprise, can't you just say, hey, send me the babysitter's number? I'm planning something for you, but I don't want to tell you what it is. And he said, no, because then it gives away that there's a surprise. And I was like, dude, you're way overthinking this. If I tell my wife, hey, what do you want for your birthday? She'll give me a list of 3 things. Oftentimes she'll say, what's the price range? And I'll have to give her the price range. And she'll say, in that price range, these are the 3 things. And I'll buy one of those 3 things and I'll wrap it the exact way that she wants it wrapped. The only element of surprise that I put in my own marriage is that she doesn't know when I'm going to give it to her. Sometimes I'll do it early, sometimes right on the birthday. Sometimes she knows it's on her birthday, but she doesn't know which one of the 3. Surprise is really advanced. There's a lot of things you can get wrong. There's a lot of pressure for the person to really love what the surprise is, which puts pressure on them and pressure on you. And it's, if routine and structure is relationship 101, surprise is like relationship 420. It's like the advanced doctorate level course that even I don't do, right? It's just too risky. Instead, clarity on what is meaningful for the person and delivering on it day after day, week after week is infinitely better. It is. It's just infinitely better. And so if you feel like your wife or your husband doesn't feel affection, the answer is not, I know what to do. Let's book a vacation for 2 weeks and we'll have this great time and it'll hit the reset button and everything will be fine. You might hit the reset button because you'll be able to give affection for 2 weeks. But 2 weeks later, after you come back, if that isn't continued, guess what? You're going to need another vacation shortly thereafter. And those are expensive and completely derailing, right? So unless you're a trust fund baby that is always on vacation or some kind of, self-made billionaire, it's not a recipe for success. Even in those cases, it's not a recipe for success because people get tired of going on vacation. They want stability in their life. And so the little kiss in the morning and having coffee every morning or, flowers once a week or a date night or even just watching a television show together, every week at a certain time, that structure, that consistency will always, in every relationship, be much more important than the big surprises. People will forgive you if you screw up on their birthday, if every day you show up for them, but not the other way around. If you are in a committed relationship that's longer than 1 or 2 months, I think that's kind of when it starts to get serious, right? Especially if you live with somebody. You need to learn this, and you need to learn it well. Every argument that you have is really just a surface. Every argument has a deeper, unseen argument underneath. So if you guys are fighting about what time somebody comes home, or if you're fighting about how the laundry is piled up in the middle of the room and it's not put away in the drawers or hung up on hangers, that's not really what you're arguing about deep down. The truth is, if everything else is great in your relationship and someone's leaving the laundry, oftentimes you'll make jokes about it. Oftentimes you'll say, here we go with the laundry mountain again. And the person will be like, I know, I'm sorry. I just didn't get to it. That's not an argument. You guys are poking fun. And oftentimes if you're tired, to be like, ugh, can we do this? And the person's like, yes, I'll do it. Or if you have time and you're not tired, you'll be like, don't worry about it. I'll take it this time. But please remember next time. And the person will say, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I'll remember next time. And chances are they won't. But if nothing else is wrong in your relationship, what do you care? Right? If the worst problem you have in your relationship is that the laundry gets piled up, guess what? You won the relationship lottery. The problem becomes when the laundry mountain in the middle of the room turns into World War III. And that's a sign that that argument is really not what you're fighting about. I'll give you an example of a new couple, right? Of what I mean. They're a new couple. They're considering getting married, really sweet couple. And he ran into the fact that she was engaged before, married before, and he got a little bit nervous because that came out a little later in the dating process than he would have liked. And then he started getting a little bit, interested in her past relationships, and noticed that she had some pictures of her with previous boyfriends on social media. Many, many years old, but it made him insecure. And so he said, why don't you delete those? Let's just start with a clean slate and not have our past encroach on our relationship. I'm going to delete mine and you should delete yours. And she said, that's a weird request. I don't want to do that. Right now, what is the core? What's the argument really about? Is it about deleting pictures of old boyfriends on Facebook? No, that's not what the argument is about. The argument is about, I feel insecure in the relationship. Because you've had previous relationships and you didn't tell me about them, I'm nervous that I'm going to be another engagement or wedding story that doesn't last, and that's painful to me. And so I'm trying to make some measures and behaviors and signs that will signal to me that you're serious about the relationship, because I need that security, right? It's an insecurity. And on her side, she saw it as, you want to control me. You're telling me what to do. I'm not allowed to have a past. I'm not allowed to be who I am. I want to feel free in this relationship, not to be with other men, but to be who I am. And if you're going to try and mold me into something else, I don't think I want to be in this relationship. That's what's underneath. That's the unseen argument. That's the deeper argument. But it's, on the surface, it's about photos on social media, about, people that you haven't seen in 15 or 10 years or whatever it was. And so if you were to present that to your friends and say, hey, my, potential fiance is making me delete photos of past people, you're already phrasing it as control. And if the guy goes to his friends and says, she has all these relationships and all I asked for her, like I told her she can, be whoever she wants, but just please just to respect the relationship, if she wouldn't mind hiding those photos on social media. Again, you're presenting it as, all I need is a little security. And so it's, if you're in my shoes as a marriage counselor, couples counselor, you listen for the tone and the way they tell the story to uncover the deeper meaning. But you can do this in your own relationship. You can really get a sense of what's really going on if you slow down, listen to the way they're talking about the problem, and ask yourself, emotionally, where's the block? Is it that they feel like I'm being unfair? That they feel like they're trying to be controlled and they have no freedom? Is it that they feel like the relationship isn't stable, that I'm about to walk out? Those are usually the big ones. So know that every argument that you have usually has a deeper emotional, unseen issue that's really bothering you. Staying on topic is really the only way to get any conflict solved. Now, I know that this may seem confusing because a minute ago I said in every conflict there's an unseen, deeper conflict. But if there is a behavior, if there is something being said or being done that's not great in your relationship, at least not great for you, and you want to bring it up to your partner, it's very easy to slide into other areas of your relationship. And that's confusing, right? Because it's not uncommon for me to watch a couple fight either in person or on a Zoom where they fight with each other, and they'll be talking about doing dishes, and then quickly it's about, you forgot to pick up our kids on time, and I got called from work, and what about the time your mom said this, and what about the time you spent all this money without consulting me? And now we're talking about 5 things. And that's impossible to contend with. If you ever watch even a presidential debate, As soon as they start bobbing and weaving, it becomes a mess and the audience gets confused and then the moderators have to step in. The problem is I can be the moderator if I'm in a session, but when it's you alone with your partner, nobody could say, hey, this is ridiculous. You're talking about four things. Please restructure your argument. You can be polite and try to say, hey, are we really talking about the dishes, or do you want to talk about all these things? And you can try to recenter the conversation. That's what you should do. But if you let it slide into another area, you can find yourself talking about something else for 10 minutes before you even realize that you guys have gotten off topic and you're expending energy. And remember, the way that you start that argument, that energy level, that tension is going to continue. So if you're already arguing and they change the subject and you follow that change, you're going to amp up that tension on a topic that you guys weren't even talking about. So it's not a good strategy. Now, if you can point out what the real problem is on an emotional level, then it's good to talk about that problem. So it's not just about dishes, it's about the way you feel alone in the kind of household duties, and it feels lonely, it feels sad, maybe you feel dismissed. So if you can get to the emotional core of what they're talking about, then absolutely you should, but you should ask, right? So a couple things we have to kind of consider. If you're the one bringing up the issue and you don't know what the emotional core of the issue is, then you could talk about the issue, right? The actual thing that's happening or not happening in your relationship, because you don't know what the emotional core is. But if you're the person receiving kind of this complaint or criticism about the relationship, you can ask, right? You could stay on topic. If the person says, hey, it sucks that I have to do the dishes all the time, what's going on? You were supposed to help. Now, the tendency might get to be defensive, but let's say you go past that and you want to be solution focused, which is ideal. But you're not talking about the emotional core. And so you just say, you know what? You're right. I did promise. And I haven't been. It's been really busy at work. Let's figure this out and come up with a schedule. Great. So you're staying on topic. Now, if the person says, you never do dishes and you didn't fill the car tires like you did, and then I had the flat one day, and then you say, hold on a second, please. We're talking about a few things. Do you want to talk specifically about the dishes? Can we do one thing at a time? It's just hard for me to focus. You could try that strategy, right? But if you notice what the emotional core is, you can also speak to it, right, directly. And you could say, listen, I've heard you bring up a few things that talk about how you feel like I'm unreliable, that I don't follow through. Is that really what's bothering you? Or did you want to talk about some of the specific incidents and how to not make those happen again? Or is it really a bigger issue that you're talking about where you feel like I'm unreliable and there's no follow through? Do you want to talk about that? And so again, just asking if it's right to talk to them at a certain point, if someone's attacking you and you have the wherewithal to hold steady and focus in on a topic, either the behavior itself or the lack thereof, or the emotional core, but try to get people zeroed in on a topic, because you cannot multitask problem solving. It doesn't work. You have to take care of one thing at a time, right? If you try to solve your, household duty chore issues simultaneously with apologizing for something your mother-in-law did, while simultaneously talking about the vigors or lack thereof on your bedroom time with each other, it's going to get too messy. And people are going to actually forget what they're talking about. It's not off the table that you will actually start talking about the dishes. Somewhere along the lines transition and your partner said, wait a second, are we still talking about the dishes? Right? That happens all the time. So staying on topic is key. I can't emphasize this enough. It's key whenever you're trying to solve any kind of problem in your relationship. Part of the reason we want to fall in love and be in relationships in the first place is we want someone who loves us. And obviously that comes with a ton of great things: affection, stability, companionship, the ability to grow together, financial pooling sometimes is part of it. But really, the core of it, right, the center of the relationship is you love me and I love you. And the nature of love is a feeling of acceptance. You have to feel accepted to truly feel loved in an unfiltered, unconditional way, which I hope, if you're listening or watching this, that is something you've had at some point in your relationship, even if it was just for a few dates, right? Because that's where hopefully you can get back to and grow towards again. And if you're on the other end, kind of the advice here, and this is key, is to learn who your partner is, right? So part of being accepted is feeling like the person knows who you are. They know all of your strengths and they know all of your weaknesses, or at least the most major ones, right? If you know someone's deepest, darkest secret and you still love them, man, they're not going to sweat the small stuff. It's just the way it works. And so part of being a good, healthy partner is learning who your partner is, even the ugly parts, and accepting that. And I would say that learning who your partner is and accepting who they are is required for a healthy relationship. One thing that I've noticed in working as a marriage counselor with people is it's not uncommon for someone at some point to say, well, it's easy for you, Dr. John, or, your wife might have it easy because she's married to you. And sometimes I laugh out loud and sometimes I laugh on the inside, but it's always a laugh because, look, I'm not a perfect husband, but I can keep it together for an hour, right? When I'm seeing my or a couple hours, depending on how long a session is, I can keep it together. I can keep it together for you for an hour or two. This isn't about me, right? But when I go home, I'm just as messed up as everybody else. I mean, maybe not. It depends who you are. I'm not going to compare myself to someone who's, has serious issues. But I would say, like, I'm, average-ish husband. I try as hard as I can to be as good as I can, but I mess up. I sometimes forget to come home on time or forget to text my wife or, yell at my kids. Guilty as charged, right? There are things that I do that aren't great, but I can keep it together. When you're with someone all day, every day, or living with, not even all day, every day, because you have jobs, but you go to bed the same, in the same bed every night, and you share a bathroom, and you have to let your guard down because you're not a sociopath and you actually want to have a life where you feel comfortable being yourself. You can't hold it together. You can't be this ideal looking, counselor who knows all the answers. That doesn't happen. And so you let your guard down. And once you let your guard down, you want to feel like you're not going to be judged. You want to feel like you're not going to have to tiptoe around things, right? That's the worst possible thing you can do in your relationship is make your partner feel like they can't be themselves, because that leads to almost every other bad thing. If your partner is ashamed of who they are in front of you, guess what? They won't show you themselves, but they'll show it to somebody else. They'll go outside the relationship. It might not be an affair, but you might also not get to know who your partner really is. A great example comes from another couple I had. I actually only saw one half of this couple. It was a really nice gentleman who was in his mid to late 60s, and he worked very, very hard. And he was the CEO of a company and retired very well financially. And what he noticed was while he was working, he didn't really get to know his wife all that well for the 30 plus years he was in his field. And sometimes, as I dug deeper, it was because they had these arguments and fights and he never bridged the gap and kind of consoled her. And so what she did is she had a really rich social life. She had volunteer positions. She had this large group of other wives that she got to know. And so when he came around to when time came around to be retired and be with his wife, she wasn't interested. She felt like, you haven't put the time in to learn who I am. I never felt accepted, so I got that connection from other people. She didn't want to get divorced, and neither did he necessarily. He wanted to save the relationship, but the romance was gone. The connection was gone. He knew her solely as a housewife, a mother, and a grandmother at this point. And she knew him as a bread earner, and that's it. Right? And as a father and stuff, and they got to know each other on a cursory level so they can do vacations, but there was no real closeness and intimacy. There was no real companionship because he never bothered learning who she really was and accepting her, and she felt it, and she got it from somewhere else. So learn who your partner is and continue to learn who they are. The person you marry is going to be different 10 years from now. And the person who you have in your relationship 10 years after marriage will be different than the person 20 years after marriage. And so you need to constantly want to know who they are today. Is there a change? If there is, learn about it. Be curious, right? Be excited about who they are and learning if you can accept that. And if you don't like certain things, that's fine. You don't have to like everything, but you have to accept that that's part of who they are. Validation of how your partner feels and their perspective, validating that you understand it and that it's something that they're allowed to have before you agree or apologize for something is key. Most fights we have as couples, if you ask someone on the street, why do you think couples get divorced? Most people will tell you because of money or affairs or something kind of drastic like that. I got to tell you, that's not the case. Do people break up for that? Of course. Of course. I mean, if you're going to have betrayals or if you're going to be, completely eye to eye, not eye to eye on money and one person spends your life savings, of course. But that doesn't happen most of the time. If you're in a no contest state where divorce is allowed for basically any reason, most people plead irreconcilable differences. They say the reason we get divorced is because we just can't see it eye to eye. And what that really means is that emotionally we aren't on the same page, right? I don't feel like I can communicate. There's that, big word that everybody keeps throwing out when they have problems with their relationship that really, doesn't mean a whole lot. When you say we can't communicate, what the hell does that mean? All of a marriage is communication. You can't go around not talking and not communicating to each other and not texting and emailing. All of a relationship is communication. And so, it's like saying, what's wrong with your relationship? Oh, the part where we're supposed to talk to each other and actually know what the heck we're doing with our day and how we feel about things? We suck at that part. It's like, that's everything. You just silently mime your way through the relationship and eventually find yourselves in the bedroom having kids? No. So the emotional state that your partner is in when they feel abandoned or lonely or, there's spitefulness in the relationship, the way that they finally take a chance to actually tell you about it, you can't shut them down. You can't shut them down. Now, if you go through and you learn tools on how to perfect your marriage, like speaking, I'll give you an example of one, speaking from a personal point of pain. So another way people talk about it is using I statements, right? So if you learn the tools like, hey, I need them to realize this is just where I feel bad and I'm not attacking them, you'll speak from an I feel standpoint, right? So you'll say, and that's those two words are very important, right? When you're communicating with your partner, instead of saying things like, you suck at making me feel safe. I'd never feel safe around you, right? Either I never feel safe around you or you suck at something. Both of those are very critical statements. They're launched as complaints about the person. And on a deeper level, what they're hearing is you're the problem in the relationship. Not me, you. You are the problem. And no one ever wants to hear that, even if it's true. Because deep down, we realize that it takes two to tango. And even if it's a 90-10 split, and 90% of the problem is me and 10% is you, where's that 10% ownership? Right? We want to hear that. We want to see, like, I've made mistakes too. Because guess what? You guys didn't walk into the marriage feeling like, oh, he's the problem, but don't worry, that's fine. I can take it, right? That's not what happens. Somewhere along the lines, things got broken. Maybe that person broke it, but you know what? There's a hand in it. There's some neglect. There's some confusion. And the truth is, if it ever is 100%, if it ever is, no, that guy was crazy and he was hiding it and he cheated on me and took all my money away, guess what? You're not having a conversation about it. You're packing your bags and you're leaving in the middle of the night and you're saying, man, did I make a mistake with my life? But if you're actually trying to talk through the problem, chances are you had a small to a large hand in it. And so, speaking from an I feel standpoint, instead of saying you're the problem in the relationship, you're saying I'm hurting. And if the person has ever loved you and has some decency, usually when they see that you're in pain and you're not lodging it against them as an attack of their character, they will try to help or at least listen. And so you can use tools like I feel this way, I feel that way, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes, you miss the mark, or you've never learned that tool, or your partner's never learned that they should phrase things from an I feel sad, I feel lonely, depressed, etc. And they say, we never do the dishes, never do that. Validating how they feel on an emotional level and validating the problems that they see from their perspective, even if it's not true. Just validate that you understand and validate that their perspective is a valid perspective to have. For a second, what does that sound like? What does that look like? So let's stick with the dishes example, right? So they say, you never do the dishes. Instead of saying, what are you talking about? I did them last week on Thursday and Friday, and I was only supposed to do them once a week. That was what we agreed to. Typical fight, right? Instead of that, you say, I hear what I'm hearing is that you feel like I never do the dishes. First of all, am I getting that right? Now, you might still get some pushback there, like, well, I just said that. Of course, that's what I'm saying. Move forward into the emotional part. Say, that must feel, because if they didn't offer the I feel blah, blah, blah part of that, conversation, do it for them. Say, that must feel really hard for you. And they'll say, yeah, it sucks. Does that make you feel like I don't care? Does it make you feel like you're lonely? I mean, tell me what's going on. And when you say something like that, and first of all, it's probably really hard to even bring it up to me. And suddenly, what happens when you validate? Liz, did you hear the shift in tone? It goes from being me versus you to I'm on your side. Even if it means that I'm the bad guy, I'm on your side. I want to know what's wrong with you because you are important and your emotional health and happiness is important. Now, it could be that you want to bring up you did it Thursday and Friday. Now's not the time, right? The first thing is to talk about how that person's feelings are hurt and you want to be there. And as soon as they say, yeah, it does make me feel sad, right? And then you can shift. Let me show you how this can shift with that same, tone, but bringing up the kind of the evidence that you're kind of confused or don't understand where they're coming from. You could say, what is it that you would like to do? Do you want me to do the dishes more often? I know we talked about once a week. Is that not enough for you? And she might say like, well, you're not doing it once a week. And you could, to which point you could say, I understand you feel that way. Maybe my recollection is different, but I did the dishes Thursday and Friday last week, which is twice. Did I not do them well? Am I missing something? Right? Very different than, what are you talking about? I did them Thursday and Friday. She might, by the way, then say, well, you did them in the afternoon, but all the dishes piled up by the end of the night, and I had to do them Friday morning. At which point you probably missed it. And you just say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize, right? And maybe I'll wait to do the dishes till the end of the night to make sure I don't leave anything for you. Is that going to be helpful? Boom, you solve the problem. So start with validation. Before you get clarity or defend your position or you even agree with their perception, get them to understand you're on their side through validating their emotional state and validating their perspective. That alone will save you so many headaches in your relationship. And by the way, that's useful for friends, it's useful for in laws, it's useful for employee to employer relationships. That kind of attitude where let me just understand what you're saying first because I care about who you are. If you can stay in that mental space, all of your relationships will be stronger whenever conflict arises. Sexual intimacy is not just about sex. Sex is a loaded topic for most couples to talk about. And I mean most. I would say out of the thousands of people who've come through my door, whether they come alone or they come with their partner, sex is usually a decent size part of the things that they eventually want to talk about in 80% of the cases. 20% of the time, they'll say things like, sex isn't an issue for us. We have great sex. But 80% of the time, even if they come in about parenting or about finances or about not feeling like they're on the same page or communication, sex is part of the issue. And sex isn't about sex most of the time. Sexual intimacy, or I should say, it's not just about sex. Now, if you're not the high drive partner, most of the time it's men, but not always, by the way. I don't even think it's like a 90-10 split. I would say it's closer to 70-30 or even 60-40. But if you are the high drive sexual partner, you know this already. You know that sexual intimacy is not just about sex. You're not saying, I need sex just because I need sex and I just want to be able to have an orgasm and move on with my day. That's not what sex is about, or not just what it's about. Yes, having a great climax is part of the beauty of life, and I hope I hope everybody has that. I hope that for you. It's more than that, right? And so if you're not the high drive partner, you might be listening to this going, yeah, I've heard that before, but it's nonsense, or what do you like? Who cares? So it's about looking in each other's eyes and feeling connected. That still takes a lot out of me. There's more to it, right? Sexual intimacy is about feeling loved and cared for. So if, for example, if you know anything about attachment style, anxious versus avoidant, people who have an anxious attachment style, the core of what they feel deep down, whether they know it or not, I'm pretty confident in saying this. Deep down, if you have an anxious attachment style, you feel like you love your partner more than they love you. And one of the few times you feel like you're on the same page is when you're engaged in an act that's really about love and you can feel connected and bonded. And one of the greatest examples of that, and one of the greatest parts of your relationship where that is present, is in the bedroom. And so it's about feeling like the scale is balanced in that moment, that I love you just as much as you love me, because when there is sexual intimacy, we're bonded into one person. And so a lot of the times, there's that craving for that kind of bond. Now, if it gets to the point where the person needs sex every day because they can't get that kind of security in other ways, they need some help, right? Because that's also not realistic. If your partner is a lower drive partner and you want sex every day just because you need to feel attached, then there are issues in the relationship. But in a normal, healthy relationship where no one has a physical impediment, if you're not having sex once a week, my question to you is why, right? If it's because you don't have emotional security so that you're not motivated to have a sexual encounter with your partner at least once a week, we need to talk about that. But I can guarantee you, if you're not going to the bedroom at least that often and there's no physical impediment, your partner is going to feel rejected. And remember, we talked about acceptance. Acceptance also means physically, also means sexually. And so sex is about balancing the scales and making you feel like your partner loves you as much as you do. Sex is also about feeling accepted and not rejected in the relationship. And sexual intimacy is also a way to smooth out the other parts of your relationship. I had a mentor, a rabbi, who kind of took me aside before my marriage, and he told me something his mentor told him. He said, sex is the oil that keeps the squeaky wheel quiet in a relationship. Sex gives you, and sexual intimacy in general, and by the way, not always penetrative sex. We're talking about all aspects of sexuality: kissing, making out, petting, everything that is a sexual touch that really wouldn't be appropriate with anybody outside of your relationship. That touch and that intimacy makes you motivated to work through fights with a lot more grace. It makes you motivated to show affection for the partner who has a lower drive in a way they prefer, right? How many times have I had a conversation with a man and a woman who have been married for many years, and he says, I don't get enough sex. And she says, well, you're never home. You never do this. You never do that. You never do this. And you never pay attention, blah, 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 and all these kind of complaints. And I will turn to the man and say, if she had sex with you 3 times a week, would you do this, 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 this? And he'd be like, I'd be doing all of that and more. And she'd said, well, why don't you do that first? And then I'll put out. And he's like, well, why don't you put out first? And then I'll do that. And it's this chicken or the egg thing. Someone needs to say, hey, I would like more sexual intimacy in our relationship, and define it however you want. How many times you actually have penetrative sex, how many times you have touch that is indeed engaging, whatever it is. I need to know what you need in order to be open emotionally to do that for me. Is it because I'm not coming home early enough? Is it because we don't spend enough time? Is it because you feel spread thin with our kids and you need help? Is it because the house is in disarray? Are you stressed out at work? Do you need to see your own therapist? Do you need a massage? Right? Let's figure out what you need, how I can give to you. And that way you're motivated to give back to me. Because I got to tell you, I am at my best and I serve you best when the sexual intimacy in our relationship is kind of meeting a base level of what I'm hoping for. I can't say expecting, because everybody's allowed to say no in that department. But if it meets this, what I'm hoping for, not even gets to like the dream level, right? But just what I'm hoping for, I feel a lot more motivated to try and give you what you're hoping for. And so sexual intimacy has the balance, it has acceptance, and it has the motivating power to make that high drive partner more into the person you want them to be in your relationship. Now you have the tools, you have the framework, you have the concepts, the mindset to really take your relationship to the newest and highest heights it's ever been. So if you're struggling in something, I hope that this advice, whatever part of it, or if you watch the whole video, really stays with you and encourages you to implement some of it, because it can transform your relationship to the best possible version of itself. Hopefully you had a small taste of it at one time, so you're really just trying to get back there, and this kind of shows you the path to do so. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room for a second. How is this advice worth $30,000? I know it's a big claim, but do you know the average cost of a divorce in America, according to Forbes? It's $30,000. And the truth is, if you're living in certain parts of the country that are a little more expensive, or a lot more expensive, I live in Southern California, for example, the average cost of divorce in California is $50,000. And that's when it's uncontested. If it's a contested divorce, it easily gets into the 6 figures and more area very, very quickly. And so that's only talking about the direct cost, right? There's also the indirect cost. Talk about the emotional turmoil, the effect it has on your kids. Oftentimes when you get divorced, you lose parts of your career or lose opportunities to advance in your career because there's just so much going on, and you don't have as much capital, and you don't have as much time. And all the energy kind of fighting back and forth, and the paperwork, and learning a new language of legalese, and exchanging children back and forth, it's completely disruptive. So the money, in truth, is usually the least of your worries when it comes to separating. And it starts at about $30,000 typically. So hopefully you can use this to rekindle your relationship and get it back to that place where it made you feel warm and fuzzy, and made your partner feel warm and fuzzy. And that, my friends, is priceless.